What's up guys, Lifting here. This is a guide to the Farrul's Frostblade and Dual Strike champion I played recently. I did this in softcore, but with a few tweaks and more emphasis on defenses, you can play this in hardcore too if you prefer. I've made a comprehensive guide on the forum. It covers all the details and some topics I won't cover in this video, so make sure to check that out if you are interested in the build. So first, let's talk about the pros and cons of the build. This is an excellent map farmer and boss killer build. With whirling blades as movement skill and frost blades to deal with trash monsters, you can achieve amazing clear speed. Dual Strike offers great single target, but if you like Blade Flurry better, that is also an acceptable alternative. I prefer Dual Strike though. For defenses, the build utilizes acrobatics, fortify, a decent amount of life gain on hit and life leech via the claws, and we also have a very powerful blind mechanic. However, as you can see, at my level, which is 92, I only have around 5,300 life, which is definitely below what I normally would try and aim for. However, due to the powerful blind effect and some mitigation via fortify, the life gain on hit, etc., it actually still feels pretty safe even in the highest tier content. However, it's not the type of build, and this is one of the cons by the way, it's not the type of build where you engage a boss and then you simply expect to stand still and do nothing while you face tank him to death. That said, you can do that. There is definitely situations where you can do that, even against some of the guardians, but it's not something I recommend. There's a very good chance that if you do that, you will die. You need to make sure that you actively make use of the mechanics of the build, move around, dodge, etc. If you do that, then you should be completely fine and you will be able to deal a ton of damage whenever you're not moving. And in case you're curious, if I were to shift the focus of the build to a more defensive setup and gain maybe 1 or 2 more levels, I think you could easily reach 6,000 HP. That would be realistic. Another downside to the build is that the Farrul's fur chest that I wear on this character is rather expensive. At the time of this video's release, it sells for around 7 or 8 exalted orbs, and that's a non-6 link. That's just the regular armor. And to fully utilize all the mechanics of the build, that armor is necessary. That said, don't worry if you can't afford that, because it's not something you will need to get the build started, and you can easily get into late game without it. But eventually you should consider getting it or using the build to farm the currency to get it. Personally, I didn't use my Farrul's chest until level 91, and with the exception of the chest armor and potentially the Watcher's Eye jewel, I actually consider the build rather budget friendly. Let's talk ascendancy choice. I chose the champion, and I primarily did that for the 100% chance to hit against taunted enemies, making it unnecessary for me to pick resolute technique, potentially saving me a lot of skill points and allowing me to go crit for more damage. Additionally, the intimidate and adrenaline buffs from the champion provide some significant damage, although I do personally find proccing adrenaline to be a bit tedious, but once you get used to it, it's not too bad. The way I do it is to have Righteous Fire on weapon swap, then after activating it, I swap back to the main setup. The health degen will continue even though we've swapped away, and once my health reaches 35%, which is considered low life in this game, adrenaline procs with all its benefits and also removes the burn effects. There's a few different ways you can activate adrenaline, but I found this to be the one that I like the most, to be honest. Alternatively, if you don't like the champion, you can also play it as the Juggernaut, the Raider, Inquisitor, and some combinations of the Scion can all work too. There's probably more ascendancies that would work fine with it. However, this guide will only cover the champion as an ascendancy choice for this build this time. So let's talk skill gems. For area clear, we use Frostblades, and it's linked to elemental damage with attacks, MULTISTRIKE, and Ancestral Call. However, it is important to take note that I put this gem setup, these 4 gems, in a pair of Elder Gloves with the implicit gems Chance to Bleed and Faster Attacks for a pseudo 6-link. This greatly increases the damage and ensures that Frostblades remain very effective into even the highest tier content available. You won't need this until late, however. For single target, Dual Strike is linked to Multi-Strike, melee physical damage, elemental damage with attacks, elemental focus, and ruthless. Until you get a cold conversion Watcher Side duel, you should use physical to lightning instead of ruthless to more effectively scale the damage. When everything is proccing, you can eventually expect up to 10 plus attacks per second with your Dual Strike setup. Considering that I use the Might and Influence duel that grants 20% chance for Dual Strike to deal double damage. This ensures, well, a lot of double damage procs. Might and Influence also adds splash damage to Dual Strike, which is not something you really notice too much, but there are some situations like the Shaper at spawn phase where this is useful. Or if you're taking down the portals of the Elder, etc. For mobility, I use Whirling Blades linked to faster attacks, Fortify, and Blood Magic. Were it possible to leave out Blood Magic, Calling Strike would have been a great alternative for even faster whirl speed and of course the ability to call. Unfortunately, for some reason, Whirling Blades have a fairly high mana cost, at least compared to something like Shield Charge, which makes this rather hard to pull off with the amount of unreserved mana we have with this build. On that note, the Aura and Herald setup consists of Hatred, Herald of Ice, Herald of Ash, and a level 3 Enlighten to ensure I have enough mana left to use the other skills. Once you get Farrul's Fur, you can also use Aspect of the Cat with no extra mana reserved. The way Aspect of the Cat works is by having 2 different buffs cycling back to back, each providing different benefits when they're active. These buffs are respectively Cat's Stealth and Cat's Agility. Cat's Stealth increases your critical strike chance, makes you harder to see, and gives you a chance to avoid damage for a short duration. Cat's Agility increases your attack and cast speed for a longer secondary duration. Both the Farrul's Bite Helmet and Farrul's Fur Chest directly influence these buffs, but we'll talk more about that later once we take a look at the gear. I also use a cast when damage taken, summon Lightning Golem and Frostbite setup for extra damage. Immortal Call won't be necessary with this build due to high evasion, dodge, and the fact that a lot of enemies shatter when they die, meaning that death effects such as the Porcupines, Spikes, which is what we really fear to be honest, won't trigger, and that is really what the Immortal Call setup is for, to prevent that from killing us. Finally, I use Frostbomb, Ancestral Protector, and Blood Rage. Frostbomb reduces the cold resistance of the enemies, making us deal more damage. Ancestral Protector increases our attack speed, while also providing a bit of damage by itself. And Blood Rage gives additional attack speed and helps generate Frenzy Charges. And it's worth mentioning that you should leave Frostbomb at level 1 to prevent the intelligence requirement from becoming an issue. It will work just as good in our case. Oh, and as I mentioned earlier, I have a Righteous Fire gem in my weapon swap that I activate to proc Adrenaline. Once activated, I swap back to the main setup and continue on. You won't cancel the Righteous Fire degen by swapping back, so eventually once it reaches 35%, your Adrenaline and the associated buffs will proc. And remember, it will only stop degenning at 35% if your Adrenaline proc isn't already activated. If you do it while it's activated, it will just take you down to 1 HP. So let's take a look at the gear I recommend for this build. For weapons, I use 2 Touch of Anguish claws. I primarily decided on these claws as they have relatively good damage. They're very cheap, but most importantly, they each provide +1 chain while on maximum frenzy charges, which hugely affects the clear speed potential and just the overall feel of the build. Anyone who has played a Frostblades build and tried chain with it and without it will know how much of a difference it makes. Which is also why you shouldn't get discouraged if you try Frostblades earlier while leveling and don't really like the skill. Once you get the Touch of Anguish claws and you get the chain up and running, it makes such a big difference. Also, I've used the Beastcraft recipe to get each claw to 30% quality, which actually provides a noteworthy damage boost, but at the cost of breaking the claw of course, as it makes them corrupted. One thing to note about the Touch of Anguish claws is that they have the affix critical strikes do not always freeze which in my opinion is worded rather poorly. It basically means that crits won't do anything in regards to freezing the enemy as they normally would when you crit and with cold damage. But if you have some other source of freezing, that still works. So in our case, we gain 20% from the claws and 10% from the skill tree, which due to the rapid attack speed of the build is enough for it to reliably freeze when you're mapping and such. Not for bosses. Not for bosses, however, but that's never been the intention either. I use the Farrul's Bite Helmet. This is the item by itself that grants the aspect of the cat skill, which reserves 25% mana when activated and grants the various buffs we talked about earlier. On top of that, it adds 1% base critical strike chance, a very powerful blind mechanic which makes many encounters very easy, and it also grants a significant damage buff against blinded enemies. The downside is that it has no life. If you want a safer choice, you can use Draconias, but then you will have to craft the aspect of the cat affix onto one of your rare items, which is a totally viable choice if you prefer. I personally like the Farrul's Bite. And so to remove the 25% mana reservation cost of aspect of the cat and allow you to use it alongside your Hatred, Aura, Herald of Ash and Herald of Ice, I use Farrul's Fur. This completely removes the mana cost of aspect of the cat and basically allows you to run it for free, so to speak. With this we also gain a nice amount of life, and Cat's Stealth gains an additional 2-second duration for a total of 6 seconds. And with this armor, whenever the Cat's Stealth buff procs, I gain maximum frenzy and power charges, which is very important as this allows us to sustain or generate charges in boss encounters where there's nothing to kill otherwise. And it's probably worth mentioning that 2+ second increased duration on the Farrul's chest and a single frenzy charge duration node, which you will be picking up anyway to get one of the frenzy charges. With that, you can pretty much sustain maximum frenzy charges indefinitely. The power charges will drop off for a few seconds in between the buffs, but it's no big deal. It's the frenzy charges that really matters here. Now, since Farrul's Fur is expensive, you can alternatively go for the Lawweave chest, which also provides some great damage. It has crit chains, elemental damage mitigation, etc. It's just overall a really solid chest for this too. And I personally used that before I got my Farrul's Fur. If you want to play it safe, the Belly of the Beast is another great choice, and even a rare chest with a high life roll, evasion and resistances is acceptable. And if we're talking about a 6-link, this is by far the cheapest solution too. I would definitely recommend just going for the rare chest if you're trying to do this on a budget. I also use a Watcher's Eye jewel which converts physical damage to cold while affected by hatred. With the proper roll, this allows you to remove physical to lightning in your dual strike setup for a more effective damage support gem. If you get really lucky or can afford it, then a double hatred roll, Watcher's Eye with base crit and fist to cold conversion is the absolute best, but probably also very unrealistic for most people, myself included. One of the nice things about that is that this would allow you to remove your Diamond Flask for a Taste of Hate, which would give you more defense, but also a very significant damage boost. However, the last time I checked for one of these Watcher's Eyes, the cheapest one went for 2 mirrors. So yeah. And in regards to flasks, I also use Ateri's Promise and Lion's Roar, both providing tons of damage. So besides the Might and Influence jewel, which we already talked about earlier, these are the unique items I use and recommend. When it comes to rare items, the most important affix are life and resistances. Make sure that once you reach endgame to have a minimum of 70 life on every rare item and at least 75% to all elemental resistances. Not necessarily chaos, but all elemental resistances. If you are a new player, this is very important to understand. Unless you have proper life rolls on your gear, your skill tree nodes won't have much to scale, thus leaving you with a small penis and poor survivability. It's also worth looking for flat physical damage, elemental damage with attacks and attack speed rolls, but these are all second priority and can only be found on some types of armor pieces. To see which, refer to the forum guide. So let's take a quick glance at the skill tree. With this type of setup, I'm looking to scale critical strike chains and multiplier, attack speed, and cold, elemental, physical, and claw damage. To effectively convert a part of the physical damage of Frostblades and Dual Strike into cold damage, I grab Winter Spirit, and once I had my Farrul's Fur, I also picked 2 additional Frenzy Charges for more damage and attack speed. I pick Acrobatics for 30% chance to dodge, which works great together with the blind we can apply to enemies via FROSTBITES. I do not pick Phase Acrobatics as it requires 4 points to get there, and I think those can be used better elsewhere. For Mana and Life Leech, I pick Soul Raker up near the Claws of the Cream Pie, and that's pretty much it for the skill tree. If you're confused about how and when to spend your points, or how to level the build in general, then make sure to check the forum guide. I have left detailed leveling instructions and progression skill trees you can follow. You can also find a Path of Building link there too, in case you want to play around with the numbers. And that's about it. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them below. Visit me on discord.gg/lifting or twitch.tv/lifting_. I've set up a fairly new Patreon page you can visit if you feel like buying me a cup of mother's milk. If you like what you saw, remember to subscribe. Thank you for watching, and bros.
Do you remember?